Hi, I'm Hannah Durden and you're listening to the Outdoors Group podcast. This podcast is a call to arms to get children and young people outside again. It's your one-stop shop for all things outdoor, child, young person and education related. Thanks for tuning in. I'm really pleased today to have Dr Naomi Fisher join us on the podcast. She's an independent clinical psychologist and an EMDR consultant. Naomi specialises in trauma, autism and alternative approaches to education. As well as all this, she's written 2 books, Changing Our Minds and one which is coming out later this year, A Different Way to Learn. As well as her own practice, she runs training for professionals, courses to support parents and is active on social media where she tackles big subjects in a way that is engaging and accessible and gives a voice to those parents and carers that might be feeling unheard or lost. Thanks for joining us today, Naomi.
Thank you, Hannah. It's lovely to be here.
I've been really excited about this episode, and there's so much that I want to ask you, but I think let's start by asking about your journey to where you are now and how you've come to focus on what you do.
Oh, well, that's a massive question, and it kind of depends which bit of my journey you're talking about. I suppose the most significant parts of my journey, perhaps, are that when I was growing up, I went to 11 different schools. My parents moved around the world, and I moved schools at least. I was never at a school for longer than 2.5 years.
Okay.
So, and I experienced lots of different types of education. And one of the things that I think I learned through doing that, and I've only really thought about this retrospectively, was that lots of the things that schools said were really important actually didn't seem to be so important because other schools didn't think it was so important. So, and particularly that, you know, there was this very much idea of the linear curriculum and how what you did built on what you needed to do what you were meant to learn in year 4 so that you could do what you meant to do in year 5 and all that kind of thing. But I would go between these really different schools. So I went to like a Steiner school, I was at an American international school, I was at a British primary school, I went to a comprehensive school, I was at a grammar school, and they would all be doing different things, and yet I was still developing and learning. So it wasn't like I got to the school and it was an American curriculum. It wasn't like I suddenly had to go back and catch up on the last 8 years that I hadn't done this kind of education system. So I think it sort of built a skepticism in me about what is actually happening at school and education, but also it enabled me to see just how different schools are. And then I went off and trained to be a psychologist, and I'm a clinical psychologist, which means that I work clinically with people, mostly who have mental health problems. And I worked in the NHS, and I found that I really, really enjoyed psychology. So in fact, I think part of my self-directed learning journey is that I actually went to university to do medicine. And the first 2 years of university, I studied medicine. I found medicine really hard going. I didn't really enjoy it. I found it was like, just learning it was really hard. And I was lucky enough to be at a university where in our 3rd year, we were allowed to choose to do anything we wanted for a year. So we had this intercalated year before we would go on to medical school. And I did psychology, and it was almost a bit of an accident that I did psychology. And then really quickly, I realised that I was absolutely fascinated by psychology, and that also that learning psychology was a completely different experience to all the learning I had been doing in the previous 2 years about anatomy and physiology and biochemistry. And it was just, learning was so fun. That year was just like, I felt like I was always taking off in that year, because it was just like I was reading loads of stuff around it. I was having all these great discussions, and I thought, right, that's it. I'm not going to be a doctor. I'm going to go and be a psychologist instead. So I went and got a place to do a PhD, and I did a PhD in autism, and then I went on and did my doctorate in clinical psychology. So I did 6 years of studying postgraduate psychology. And it was just, I felt so lucky actually to have had that chance to step away from the branch, the sort of route I was on, because it was like, I thought, if I'd gone to another university, I might never have found out that I really, really enjoyed psychology. And then I had my own children. And that was in when was my first child born? 2008. Yeah. And then he's a summer born boy. And as he was getting towards school age, I just started to have more and more reservations about what I knew as a psychologist about child development and learning, and what I could see was going to happen in the school system. Not so much necessarily in the early years, not so much about reception or nursery, but more about where it was going, and what seemed to be happening in schools was that we were taking children and really trying to do things with them that they found really difficult. So putting them in desks and trying to get them to learn things and get them to sit and write when they didn't really want to sit and write. And particularly my son, who just was not interested in reading and writing at all at the age of 3, which he would have been going to school age just 4. And I went to the kind of induction day at our local primary school. We had a place at our local primary school on our street, and they gave us this list of words, and they said, can you teach them these over the summer? And these were words like the and if and but. And it was like, how am I going to tell it to my 3-year-old? And I was like, wow,
He's
how?
so young.
But not just how, but not just how, but why? Why?
Yeah.
You know, it makes, if you think what a 3-year-old is like, they're like in the moment. They're doing things because they want to do it right then.
Yeah.
They're learning things because they're interested right then. And I was going to take him out of this and try and teach him these words. And I just thought, right, we're just not going to do this. We'll do something else instead. We'll keep them at home. So, and then I think like lots of people, when I started out home educating, I thought that it would be something we would do maybe until he was about 7. I thought we'd do more play-based, because that's what the research shows. Play-based is better when they're younger. I thought we could do loads of play, then maybe by the time he's 7 or so, he'd be ready to go into a more formal school environment. And what I found was, as I kept him out, and then his sister as well, who's 3 years younger, is that actually the gap between what they were doing at school and what we were doing at home got wider and wider, whereas I had kind of thought it might come together. I thought, you know, maybe by the time they're 6 or 7, they'll be saying, Mummy, can we do some workbooks? Or they'll be interested. And they just weren't, you know. No. They just weren't. And so we decided that we would not do something at school, and we have taken a kind of alternative route. They're at self-directed learning settings. They went to a self-directed learning setting in Paris, and they're actually at one a part-time now. But we decided that they would not go to conventional school. And then the more I was watching them, this is the last bit of my journey, I guess, the more I was watching them learn, the more I was just thinking, from my background as a psychologist, I was thinking, there's so much going on here about how they're learning, and it's so invisible to the mainstream. You know, like as a psychologist, I'd learned all this stuff about child development. I had a PhD in child development. And never did they say in any of the studies, this is all about child development in the context of children who go to school for 30 hours a week. It was like school is this invisible thing in development that we never talked about, because it was assumed that all children went to school. And yet here was I watching my children develop without school, and just seeing how different that could look, and thinking maybe lots of the assumptions that we make about how children learn and develop are actually how children learn and develop in the context of school. Yeah. And that maybe be something I could write about. So I did. That's a long way.
Well, it's a nice segue, because I was going to say, one of your videos that I watched, I was looking at you talking about the difference between how psychology kind of talks about learning and how it's perceived like by those within the kind of national educational system. So like kind of what are those? What do you kind of explain a bit more about those differences, and why are they important? Like, how psychologists would say learning happens versus how schools want learning to happen, as it were.
Yes. So schools see learning mostly as in terms of learning a curriculum, acquiring a curriculum, and it's quite a linear process. So you need to learn this so that you can learn this, and you learn this, and you can learn this, and we can kind of put children in particular situations, and we can tell them stuff, and they will learn, and that's what learning is. They will remember stuff. They will remember the curriculum. And from the start, when I started to see how learning was talked about in schools, it felt wrong to me, because all of the stuff I'd learned about child development was about how learning was this active process. So children would basically engage with the world around them. They would engage with adults. They would explore things, and in that process they would be learning. But it was very much something that wasn't done to them. It was something that they did, and it was something they
participating
did in. Yes, and that they actively drove, so that they would. So there's a developmental psychologist whose work I really like called Alison Gopnik, and she has this theory about children learning as scientists. So she talks about it as child as scientist. Basically, that children are testing out hypotheses all the time about how the world works. They're trying to make sense of this big, confusing world that they're in. And the way they're doing that is through asking questions, through doing experiments. And actually I really saw that in my daughter in particular when she was about 5 or 6. She was just in this constant state of experimentation, questioning, working out how the world worked. And I knew from my own experience of learning that I loved the kind of learning where I was working things out and when I was exploring things. And I really didn't like the kind of learning where I was sat in a desk and told stuff that I had to remember. So I was like, well, why are we not creating that kind of environment for our children?
Yeah, well, we're not facilitating that.
So, why are we not doing that? Because we know that works and we know it's enjoyable and we know children naturally do that. So it's really, they do that. The place they do that in the education system is good nurseries, good early years setting. Do that. They work on those set of principles. And it's almost like the moment that some children, maybe many children, are compliant enough to put them into a desk, we say, okay, now it's much better for you to be in a desk. Much better.
You're done now.
Yes, basically, now that you're 4 or 5, you're old enough for us to persuade you to do this, so we're going to do that.
Yeah.
I just think it works against children's natural way of being. And why would we want to do that? Why would we want to put children in a position where the priorities are getting them to sit still, getting them to listen quietly, getting them not to ask questions because they want to, be told things to remember rather than asking questions? We're working against basic child psychology. It's like we're working with their weaknesses rather than their strengths. And why not work with strengths? Why not use their strengths in education?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was about to ask a different question, but then my mind kind of went to think. I was thinking about a primary school teacher that I was talking to once who had 4 children herself, and she'd said to me, I hate the class management systems that we use with the sun and the rain cloud and the storm. And she said, I'd never do that with my own kids. I'd never do it with my own kids. She said, but there's no other way to manage a class of like 25 or 30 kids. And I thought, well, there must be another way to do it. But I guess that's a big thing to explore. Like how can we do it a different way that is, as you say, working with them and not against them.
I mean, there are lots of books written about different ways. There are different ways. But I think part of the problem that we've got is that if you are essentially trying to put children into a mould which they haven't chosen, they don't want to be doing, they're not interested in necessarily what you're trying to teach them, then you need to control them to do that. That's just a fact of life, because they're not naturally drawn to doing that. So you're going to need to control them, and that's where the behavioural systems come in. But I don't see that as inevitable about having 25 or 30 kids.
No, well, that's what I thought.
Because there are many classes that don't work like that. But I think there is a thing that if you are trying to if your main aim is to have those children sitting still and listening to you quietly so that you can impart the curriculum to them which they haven't chosen, then I can see why control strategies are an important part of that. But I see it as part of a whole integrated whole.
Just one problem in a bigger set of problems.
It's a solution. It's a solution that schools have found to the problem that children don't want to do this, and they show the way they don't want to do it. They show it through their behaviour.
Rather than addressing why they don't want to do it, and as you say, how we can work with them rather than against them.
Exactly, rather than asking ourselves, hang on a minute, lots of these children are showing us that they're not really happy in the setting and it's not really working for them. So what could we do about that?
What can we do? And I mean, I was also reading about motivation, and obviously this kind of sounds like where the motivation comes from is really important in learning, right? So if a child's motivated to learn, they're going to just, as you say, they're going to do it. Like you get, my daughter is 13 and she's obsessed with textiles, and she says she wants to be a costume designer, and that's not come from anyone but her, because I can't sew for toffee. I mean, I guess I'd just like to explore a little bit about, I think I read about you talking about intrinsic motivation and how, like, what that kind of exactly is.
So motivation can really come from the inside or it can come from the outside. And young children are, I think, without exception, intrinsically motivated to learn. So they come into the world, they don't have to be motivated to learn how to talk, how to walk, how to engage with the world, how to communicate with their parents. They want to do these things. They do it all differently and at different stages, but they are intrinsically driven to explore the world and to find out about it. Then they go into school, and in school there's a deliberate shift from intrinsic to extrinsic motivation, and most teachers maybe wouldn't think about it that way, but when we start introducing things like the behaviour charts on the walls, or when we start grading children for what they do, or when we start basically telling them that doing their reading now is going to get approval, whereas running off and hiding isn't, or play is now less important than what the teacher wants them to do, we're shifting the balance from intrinsic to extrinsic motivation. And we do that again, schools do that in order to get children to do the things they want, that school wants them to do, because school is saying these are the things that are important for you to do right now, doesn't really matter whether you agree. And therefore, we're going to motivate you by giving you a prize if you do it well, or we're going to give you certificates, or we're going to give you Star of the Week, or all that kind of thing. And that shifts the emphasis from internal to intrinsic to extrinsic motivation. There's a problem with that, and the problem is that the research shows that actually using extrinsic motivators like that, so using rewards and punishments in order to make somebody do something, has a damaging effect on their intrinsic motivation. So if people are doing something that they enjoy and you start making it something that they do for a reward, it becomes less enjoyable. So I think that this is a lot of the difficulties that we see, the problems that we see in our adolescents, I think actually can be traced back to this taking away, shifting of the motivation from intrinsic to extrinsic. Because what happens is that by the time lots of young people get to adolescence, they're not really connected to their intrinsic motivation anymore. Okay. They don't really know what interests them, what they want to do, and what they find reinforcing. All they know is it going to get me my exam result or not? Yeah. They've been trained to do things for external reasons, and that's really destructive of our kind of internal way of being, because humans like to have choices. We like to be autonomous. We like to be able to make decisions for ourselves. And I mean, like you, I've got teenagers too, and they are so motivated to do stuff, so like driven to learn all kinds of things. I mean, the thing that really surprised me actually was my son was very, very motivated to learn handwriting, and I'd always thought that handwriting would be one of those things. You know, people say, "Oh, you're not teaching them handwriting. How are they going to learn handwriting?" And when my son was about 13, he said, "I really struggle with handwriting. I want to improve it. I'm going to do it." And he talked to a learning advisor at his self-directed place. And he got a workbook, and he practiced for 20 minutes a day, completely without any input from me at all. In fact, I didn't know he had done it until I saw he signed the birthday card, and I was like, that doesn't look like your writing. Yeah, and who wrote that? No, because that drive, I think that intrinsic drive is we haven't messed with it basically. Yeah. And so when he wants to do something, he's like, right, I'm going to do it. I want to do it. Yeah.
Do you think for those who have been in the school system that have kind of lost that intrinsic, do you think it's like possible to kind of fall in love with it? I mean, presumably we're setting them up with a barrier before they've even reached adulthood, because they then are going to hit 18 and go,
what do I do? It's a barrier to learning, isn't it? I think many people reach 18, and in fact I would put myself in that category. If we think about me going to university to study medicine, I don't think I was ever really interested in studying medicine for itself. I think I'd become extrinsically motivated, and I was quite good at science and maths, and I was encouraged to do more of them because I was good at them. And so I went to university to do something because it seemed like an extrinsically valued thing to do. You know, medicine is valuable. Everybody talks about, it's got high status. And doing psychology was actually the first time in my school career where I was able to choose to do something that apparently had no long-term consequences for me. So because I could choose that third year, and I would have then gone, the expected thing would have been that I'd have gone on to do medicine anyway. So I could do anything. Like, I mean, someone in my year did Chinese. You know, you could really do anything in that year.
Anything you wanted at that point,
Yes. But of course you could do anything, but it was also a really exciting place. You know, it was an exciting place to study, and it was.
Yeah.
It's when I think back on it, it was like the perfect situations for a kind of intrinsic motivation to come back again, because I was like, I'm only doing psychology because I like it. That's the only reason. And I think we take those choices out the education system way too early. We much too quickly move to, you're doing this because it's going to be exams, you've got to do it for GCSE, you need to show it on the test, and I think that's really destructive of learning. And I think we can get it back, and I think we see that process when we talk in the home ed community about deschooling. I think that's a lot of what we're seeing. We're seeing children reconnecting with what matters to them, but I think it could take a long time, and the older they are, the longer it takes. It's hard, but because it's also hard for parents. It's about getting back into a mindset where, you know, what your child is interested in is what's important, rather than what they achieve. And that's harder. The older your child is, the harder that is to do.
The harder it is, the nearer they are to exams and things,
GCSE, exactly. Everybody's like, oh gosh, you know, we can't let them completely do what they're interested in, because what about English and maths?
The maths and science, And they say a month, don't they, for every year a child's been in school for deschooling. So if you've got a 15-year-old out, you think, oh, well, that's actually like a year of hands off, which is quite scary as a parent.
Yes, exactly. And I think the older they are, the more blocks there are to deschooling as well. That there's, I think, if, for example, if everybody's very anxious about GCSEs, I think that will actually actively stop people deschooling, because they can't let themselves think, actually, what am I interested in? What do I want to do? Because it's all like, what about I don't do those GCSEs and everybody else?
Yeah. I'm actually going to skip one of my questions and come back to it, because I think this is a good, I was just thinking about in the home ed world a few years ago, everyone I knew was sharing this post that you'd written about the natural kind of stages of learning for children if they hadn't been to school. And I think the thing that stuck out for a lot of us, is about being play-based until 9 or 10, because as you mentioned earlier, lots of research says play-based till 7, you know, lots of countries are play-based till 7. So I think lots of us went, 9 or 10, that's a lot later than we thought. Just be good to explore that a little bit.
So one of the amazing things about home educating my own children was the opportunity to look at what was happening, not just for them, but also for all their peers, all their home educated peers that we met, and to be asking myself all the time this question: how much of what we think we know about child development is really child development in the context of school? You know, how much is, for example, we think, yes, they're play-based till 7, because actually they're never given the chance not to be play-based
for longer.
No one does that. So, and also at school, play is often denigrated. So I one of the things I really noticed between my children and school children when we met up with them was that school children would say things like, oh, I'm too old for that. Or, you know, I can't spend all my time playing anymore. I remember some children would say these things, which quite clearly come straight out of their teachers' mouths. You know, I can't spend all my time playing anymore now that I'm 9. and it was kind of like, my children would just look at them like, what are they saying? And because they still wanted to spend most of their time in play. But also, I realised that we don't value a lot of older children's play in the same way that we... I was looking, in fact, for pictures, just for stock photographs about teenagers playing. There weren't any. You know, all younger children, we know what we think play looks like. It looks like pretend play and tea parties and, you know, Lego and all this kind of thing. We don't know. Many of us don't even have an image in our head of what play looks like for older kids. No, we just, and the play that they often are drawn to, which is often video game play, we denigrate it. We'd say it's a waste of time. So we kind of push our children away from play, and the whole of society pushes them away from play and says, you've got to keep going, you've got to move on, you've got to become this adult person. And one of the things which always worried me, actually, as I saw children, and I think this connects with neurodivergency, but I saw children doing different play stages at different times, which were really at odds with what I'd been taught as a psychologist. So imaginative play was the really key thing. That one of the things you learn as a psychologist is child development. Imaginative play is early years. You know, it starts sort of 2, 3, 4, 5. That's when they're really into imaginative play, and lots of children live in an imaginary world, and that's all kind of accepted and valued at that stage in their lives. And then some children don't do that, and that's actually I'm not sure if it still is, but it was a diagnostic criteria for autism, You don't have that early imaginative play. It's different. So maybe at that stage, children are much more interested in feeling textiles all the time, or they're interested in rolling wheels, or they're interested in, other stuff, but they're not doing that kind of imaginative play. And what I saw among the children around me is that lots of the children who weren't doing imaginative play in those early years were doing it later on in different ways. So I saw children who really didn't seem to be into imaginative play. When they got to maybe 8 or 9, they would discover something like Minecraft, and they would suddenly get into this kind of imaginative world. It would be imaginative play in Minecraft, because Minecraft is an amazing place for imaginative role play, but they would also take that outside of the game. So they would also be playing real life Minecraft in the park, for example, and they would be acting things out. And I was like, wow, this is imaginative play happening now. But if they were at school, they would already have had loads of messages about, you're too old for this now. This isn't so important. And whereas in school, we create an environment for younger children to do imaginative play. Like, we have the home corner, and we have dressing up costumes for younger children. None of that is in place for your 8 or 9-year-old who suddenly found imaginative play. And I was thinking, what if a lot of the difficulties that children have maybe later on aren't so much because they didn't play imaginatively when they were 4, but actually it's because when they were ready for imaginative play at age 8 or 9, it wasn't possible anymore. They were it was too late. This idea of gone. Yes, exactly. And people often ask me about that. You say, aren't you worried your children are going to have gaps, because we haven't taught them things, we haven't gone through a curriculum? And I say that the gap I'm much, much more worried about is, what if they miss out on having that opportunity to play as much as they need to at a time that they won't be able to go back to? Because, if you're really into imaginative play when you're 8 or 9 and you really want to be doing it, that's all you want to do, and instead you're being made to spend most of your time sitting at a desk or doing structured activities, because we're not set up for imaginative play in 8 or 9-year-olds. You can't go back and catch up on that imaginative play when you're 35, for example. No. I can't do it. And in fact, one of the things that really made me think was trying to do imaginative play with my children, finding it such extraordinarily hard work, and looking at how they didn't find it hard work at all. Clearly for them it was this, and go on for hours. Whereas for me, it's like, oh my goodness. And I thought, it's so funny, I've lost this ability to do imaginative play. And though apparently from the outside, I'm doing imaginative play, really I'm pretending to do imaginative play. Because I'm not really doing it. It's fake, basically.
I think that will resonate with parents everywhere, where your heart sinks when you go, yes, okay, I'll be a horse.
Please, could we just do it for 10 minutes? Because really, I just can't do it anymore. But we've lost it, and that's the gap, yes? When they're 8 or 9 and want to do this all the time, then they can't go back and do that. And actually, what damage are we doing by not allowing them to do that at the stage that's right for them?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Well, I think that will probably reassure quite a few people who are listening to this today, because, in the home ed world, even people I know whose kids have never been to school, still about 9, 10 of their kids are, slow readers, or I'm doing inverted commas. Obviously, people who are listening can't hear that. They go, but they're 9, they should be reading and stuff. And it's funny because I feel like we give ourselves a break until 7, and then everyone suddenly goes, right, this is the magic age where it's all meant to happen. And then it's like, well, no, actually, maybe not, guys. But
no, I think I also definitely thought that, for sure. And it was
I was
much
guilty
later.
as well. Yeah.
And I thought, I think we're schooled. We have our own schooled mindset of thinking about it. But I noticed the age of 9 or 10 seemed to me, and I think I wrote about that in that article, but I've written about it in my book as well, that I see and have seen a real qualitative shift in how children learn around that time of puberty, basically.
Yeah.
And that's when they seem to start. They seem to get the idea, or they start to get the idea that they might want to improve certain skills. They might want to learn to do something for a future goal. So whereas children, when they're in the play-based stage, mostly they're not practicing doing something for a future goal.
No, they're not forward thinking.
No, they're just like playing because that's what I want to do right now. And people often get confused when I talk about motivation. They say, well, isn't that just moving from whim to whim? Isn't intrinsic motivation? How are they ever going to learn to do anything that they don't want? How are they ever going to learn to exist in the real world? Well, what I see is that as they move into adolescence, children who haven't been made to do stuff, who have not been forced to sit down and follow a curriculum, their brains mature and they start to be able to think about future goals, which actually makes total sense from psychology. It's another thing that we talk about. It's like being able to be goal focused, be able to see, holding what we would call it is holding a goal in mind. So you're able to think, okay, I would quite like to learn to read. It would be useful. But, you know, these books aren't that exciting, but I'm going to do it because I would like to be able to learn to read. And that change, school tries to make children do that at the age of about 5 or 6. I have very, very few children who are ready for that at the age of 5 or 6. But by the time they are 11 or 12, lots more of them are able to do that. And I saw it with both my and also of course they don't necessarily choose the goals that parents would choose for them. So both of my children, I saw a real shift around the age of 9, and for both of them it was about riding a bicycle. So it was like both of them, and they both couldn't ride a bike up to that point at all, and they basically didn't really want to practice. They got on, fell off, and then they were like, no, not doing it.
Done. Yeah.
And then when they were 9, when they were 9, my son said, I'm going to learn how to ride a bicycle. And he put on long sleeves, long trousers, guards, because he falls off a lot. And he just went outside into our driveway and he just got on his bike, fell off, got on his bike, fell off, got on his bike, fell off for the whole of an afternoon. And then he did it the whole of the next afternoon. And then by the 3rd day, he could ride his bicycle.
Yeah.
And, the clothes had these massive holes in them by that point. But I thought, wow, that is something I do not think he would have been capable of doing. Even 6 months ago, he would have fallen off and he would have been like, that's not getting back on again. So he was able to keep that idea. Yeah. And I think that's a massive neurological development that happens for kids.
Yeah.
And when that doesn't happen, you're in this position of trying to make it happen for them. And you can't. You
can't force it, yeah. Yeah, no, it's really interesting.
And you do a lot of damage. You do a lot of damage by trying to force it.
Yeah. Because then it damages their lifelong journey, right, with learning.
Exactly. Their intrinsic motivation is damaged, and also they've learnt to not think about themselves as the person who is the agent in their learning. So I think one of the things that, unfortunately, I think people learn at school is that somebody else decides what you're going to learn, and your job is just to learn it. So you're effectively passive there. You're not the active agent. And it's so funny because I get asked some questions a lot. And one of the questions I get asked a lot is by adults who say, oh, but if I hadn't gone to school, I would never have learnt my times tables. Or if I hadn't gone to school, I would never have learnt about this poetry, which I think is really important now. And, what do you say about that? And usually what I say is, well, but why on earth wouldn't you have done? If my children, they needed to learn their timetables, they would just go and learn their timetables. They probably wouldn't even mention it to me because they don't need
to. They just
to.
do it,
The information's out there. It's not like you need, it's very easy to find the information to learn the timetables. That's what you want to do.
Yeah.
Why do you think you have to be made to do it, or else you wouldn't do it?
I've had so many anecdotes of older home ed kids who have gone at 13, 14, right, well, I want to do this at college, but I know that I need to do X, Y, Z to do it. And they've just gone off and done it. My friend's son is a phenomenal guitarist and he wants to go to a special music college. And he was like, I don't really like English and maths, but I'll need to do the GCSEs to get it through. So, Mum, can you help me with it? And she was just like, a year previous, she thought, well, he'll just play music. Yeah. He won't do anything else. He'll just play. But then it was like, oh no, he's actually just asking to do these things so that he can get to the next goal. He's got that goal in his head.
And you see that so clearly in these home ed kids.
Time
and that's
again,
what I think is so interesting. Yeah, because we just don't hear that. In mainstream psychology, that's just not talked about because it doesn't happen in the school system.
No.
And it's like, I think by letting them have this play-based stage for as long as they need to do it, you're basically nurturing their intrinsic motivation all the way through. And then when their brain starts to mature in adolescence, and the bit of their brain that's maturing is that prefrontal cortex, and it's the bit that enables them to say things like, okay, I'd like to go to music college. I'm going to need to do English and maths. I'm going to study English and maths, even though I don't like them, which is actually a form of intrinsic motivation. People often imagine that intrinsic motivation just means I do it because I enjoy it, but it doesn't. It means I do it because it has value to me. I do it because I want to do it, even if I don't actually like it very much. Whereas
Yeah.
extrinsic motivation will be, you are going to do English and maths, and if you don't do them, I'm going to punish you. And if you do them,
Yes.
I'll give you a grade. That's extrinsic motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's so, and even in the home ed community, I think certainly when my kids were younger, I didn't see people talking about that shift very much. And I think it's so important because it's what gives you as the parent confidence to keep going in those early years, and they're not doing any of the things that other kids are doing. You know, it is really nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Everybody else can do fractions and can read and can write, and the children are still really playing. That's it.
Yeah, it's taken. I mean, I'm on my youngest of 3 is 8, and he's the only one that I've been able to be like, nope, it's fine. Like with the others, I was like, 8, not really reading very well. But with him, I've just been like, well, I know that he will because the others do, so I'll just wait and it'll come.
Just let it have its time. Exactly.
Yeah, it'll come when it comes. Obviously, we've spoken about how you do have a specialism in autism, or working with kind of neurodiverse kids. So I think we'll move on to this because I'd love to kind of get the most of your expertise on this. So at the Outdoors Group, we work with lots of young people and learners with kind of special educational needs. I mean, there's so many things that we could talk about here, but maybe about how parents can support, like people listening to this, we have a lot of parents listen, how they can support their neurodiverse children, especially if they are maybe in the school, because obviously not everyone is ready to take the step of home ed, or they can't, or for whatever reason. And I've seen you talking about low demand parenting. Is that kind of to do with this as well? Yeah,
I think a low demand parenting.
Sorry, that was a really long question. Sorry.
Yes, it was. I'm just trying to think about where the most useful thing to go there is. So I think the way that I see special educational needs and neurodiversity is that it's not something that's necessarily located solely in a child. It's something that takes place in the interaction between the child and their environment. So if you have somebody in an environment where they cannot learn for whatever reason, then that person is quite likely to be diagnosed with special educational needs, because that's how our school system works. That's how our school system deals with children who don't fit into the mould at the moment. That doesn't mean that in another setting they won't absolutely find learning really different. It can be really different if you change the environment. And we have a lot of focus in our present system as to how can we change the child to fit into the environment. And really what I'm saying all the time is we need to be thinking about how we change the environment to fit the child. So if you've got a child who's struggling at school, then it needs to be about talking to school about how can we be more flexible. Are there ways to be more flexible at school? And schools vary so much in their approach to this. And I think it's really important as a parent to know that if your school isn't very flexible or isn't able to hear how your child actually is or how they're responding to school, there might be another school that does to behave differently. So one child whose story I sometimes tell is someone I saw for an assessment. It was an autism and ADHD assessment, and he was having the most awful time at school. He was being excluded. He had in-school suspensions. I think he'd spent more than half of the last term sitting in the headmaster's office in a kind of in-school isolation, basically. And because of the way that their school behaviour policy worked, they had whole class punishment. They had whole class rewards, which meant that he was hated by his class because he was the one who continually meant that they didn't get their golden time, they didn't get their awards in assembly, they didn't get all the rewards because of him. So he was very unhappy, and his parents were very unhappy too. And so the school had a kind of zero tolerance approach, and I asked his parents what kind of things was he getting in trouble for, and they basically said that things escalated. So they said that he found it very hard to sit still. He was like 9 or 10. He was moving around a lot. That would often get him in trouble. He would tap his pen on the desk all the time. That would get his name written on the board. When his name was written on the board, that made him feel bad, and then it all escalated basically. And I said to his parents, I think you should move school. And because I was working in the area, I knew that there were other children with similar profiles at other schools, and they were
doing better.
Much better. So I said to them, I think you should move school. I really think it's going to make a difference. And it was a bit of a, that isn't often something we would say as a psychologist. No. But anyway, I did say that, and I saw them again a few months later, and they said it's made such a huge difference. And the first thing that school did, which made a difference, was when he started tapping his pencil on the desk, they got a bit of foam and they wrapped it around. And they said, that's fine, you can tap it all you want.
That's just a simple solution.
It's not going to irritate anybody else. Yes, it doesn't make sense now, and so it's going to be okay. Yeah. And I just thought that's what you need. You need a school that's thinking flexibly. How can we help this child manage, rather than we're going to punish this child in submission, because that can go really badly wrong. And I think the sort of principle that I see of low demand parenting, which is for all kids, for kids in school and out of school, it's that principle that we need to think about how our children are really learning, and we need to think about how, for children who don't respond well to punishments, for example. So I meet lots of children like that little boy who taking a behavioural approach basically means that things just escalate for them because they can't comply with being asked of them. And the way that the behavioural system responds to that is to punish them for not complying. And they still can't comply, so then they get punished again, and they still can't comply, so they get punished again. And the whole thing just goes downhill really, really quickly for them. So low demand parenting is about turning that around and saying, okay, so this child can't do this right now. So how can I create an environment for this child in which they can flourish, and there isn't a negative environment, basically. Because I think so it's really tough. Well, it doesn't work for anybody when children are surrounded with negativity. You shouldn't be doing this, shouldn't be doing this, shouldn't be doing this. It doesn't help.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I remember reading lots about toddler development and lots of mainstream toddler stuff about, don't tell your toddlers, don't do this, like rephrase it and stuff. But I feel like we kind of forget about it once they hit like school age. And then I remember having like a whole framework for like, instead of saying, don't jump on the sofa. Oh, instead of jumping on the sofa, why don't we go outside and jump here? And, or, all these things like, I know you're feeling frustrated and I really understand that, blah, blah, blah. But I feel like as soon as they hit school age, it kind of goes out the window, remembering, and actually they still probably need the same kind of approach.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? It's like we have this very, in fact, that was one of the things that led to me initially keeping my children out of school, that I also had read a lot of things about toddler development and about how I wanted to talk to them and being positive rather than negative and all that kind of thing. And then I realised that actually once they went into school, a whole different set of stuff would apply, and I would have no control over that at all. I couldn't, because you can't affect how adults are with your child at school, really.
No.
And also you get pulled into it, because once your child is at school, you're responsible for making them comply with a lot of the rules, like having your hair brushed and cut, and wearing the school uniform and being there on time and doing your homework. All of that kind of thing is actually delegated to parents. So you get pulled into it, and it's very hard to then maintain a different way of being with your children. And also there's very little really about child development beyond that. There's loads of books about development in those early years. And it's kind of like, what's the next bit? Where's the next bit?
And lots of teenage stuff I've read, like how to deal with your like angry teen, but that kind of 5 to 12 bit, it's like, oh, what about them? But that's so changing the environment. That's I think a really key takeaway. And I think for us, we often work with kids that are struggling in their kind of main educational setting, or they might be about to be excluded and things like that. And it's interesting when they come and start doing sessions like one-to-one in the woods with our staff, you often get parents or even teachers or social workers or people coming in and saying, like after a couple of weeks, saying this is like transformational, this is not the child that was in school, and all we've done is taken them into the woods. And I was just wondering if you had any kind of different environment, in a different way,
aren't you? That's the thing as well.
It's just one-to-one, and they like the focus is always on the kind of that social emotional, like let's work on that stuff and kind of build their confidence and back up. But I mean obviously the keys in the name, the outdoors group, we think the outdoors is like a really crucial part of that for us. But I wondered whether you had kind of any experience of outdoor learning environments, or whether you had thoughts about taking education outside.
So I think that's a really interesting example you used there of this being transformatory, because I think there sometimes could be an expectation that we can transform the child and then we can put them back into their other environment and they'll be okay now. And I think there's an ongoing thing that we have to be aware of, which is that people are different in different environments, and
Yeah.
different environments suit different children.
Mm.
And it isn't about kind of fixing them so that they can go
No,
back to the environment that really wasn't working.
Well, some of these kids do stay with us long term, like for years and years and years out, because
Yeah.
that's, it's working. So what? Yeah, why break something if it's already fixed?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the thing about outdoors stuff is that there are some children for whom that doesn't work, or who really don't like being outdoors. And I think it's good to be able to accept that as well, that there are some children, for example, it's almost like their outdoors space. I think there's something about children being able to explore and be able to interact with the world, and that is something that can happen outdoors, but for other children, that isn't necessarily where they naturally are going to be. And I think it's important not to be too rigid about this is the right environment for all these kids, because it might be for some, but not for others. But I would guess that part of what's going on in your environment is that the relationships that adults have with the young people are really different. And that's part of the environment as well. Because I think we often think about environment in terms of physical environment, and I think that is important. But I think the human environment is absolutely crucial. And that's the thing which we can do so differently in an alternative educational setting to a school setting. And you just hear the voice, you can just hear it in people's voices, the difference in relationship, can't you? You just hear a group of kids with their teacher and the way the teacher talks to them, and then you go somewhere else, you can just hear the difference immediately. And that's always been something that I've tried to seek out for my kids, those other adult relationships where people are relating to them on a level and being non-hierarchical and meeting them where they are. It's just enormous. It's so it makes such a difference.
Yeah, do you know, I think you're right. I think that's probably it. And we spoke to the guy from Spectrum Gaming, Andy, and I forgot a while ago, and they were talking about this kind of the forest school approach of having like almost like a triangle, but it's a trust between your outdoor environment, your like learner or young person, and that's kind of that adult. And it's kind of you can't demand respect, so you kind of earn it, don't you? And that's, I think, the difference, isn't it? If you go in thinking, well, this child has there's no obligation for them to trust me or like me or whatever, but you kind of earn it, don't you? And I guess that's the difference when you build that relationship.
Absolutely, yes. And I think that's an interesting example of Andy Robertson with his Taming Gaming, because I think for some children that is exactly that's kind of their outdoor space, being in those games. And I think that unfortunately sometimes the forest school ethos can be quite negative about children whose place is gaming, for example, because we kind of overvalue that. And I think that can also be an adult agenda. It can also it can be a barrier, basically. It's another barrier towards that relationship between adults and children, if the adults are saying you need to be doing this because this isn't as valuable. And I think that's something we should avoid.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point, isn't it? Because Andy marries them both together. He has the Spectrum Gaming, but he also has the Forest School. So and then we could do a whole nother podcast about video games, because it's so interesting, isn't it? Like
you're talking about Andy Smith. Yes.
Oh, Andy Smith, yes.
No, sorry, I just read. I read. There's Andy Robinson as well, but yes, Andy Smith, absolutely.
Andy Smith, that's what I'm thinking. But you could do a whole nother podcast on video games, because I think, again, like, not just within the home ed community, but all the parents I know are fairly like, all they want to do is game. And like when we see them playing those video games out, like in a playground or at each other's houses, we think, look at their imagination. They can't even stop thinking about video games to play. And actually, you've kind of made me think earlier when you were saying about that's still imaginative play, if they've taken something that they've done online and then put it in real life. So it's an adult kind of rewiring. Yeah.
It's play. I think we don't value it, and it's particularly teenage play often. And it is interesting how much I remember thinking about this when my children were really little. It's funny how the moment something is in a video game, it's like it's devalued. Just thinking about, say, narratives, stories. There are many amazing narrative video games, but we don't value them in the same way as we value a book. So reading a book is good, valued. Playing a narrative video game is, unimaginative or passive, people will say. And it's like, but actually the narrative there is that they're still developing the same skills. They're still engaging in narrative. They're still sort of immersing themselves in this story. And why do we value one kind and not the other? And I think really also it leads to all sorts of places as well. Like, it's not just playing imaginatively within a video game, but I've seen so many children bringing the ideas from video games into their physical, into their play in the real world. So I do see, and I see it as play. I see it all as play based again.
Yeah, see, that's another really good takeaway for lots of us that have got children that love video games, to think, actually, maybe we need to take a different approach to it. I've realised I've taken up quite a lot of your time today, but before we finish, I was just wondering if there's anything else you wanted to kind of mention, or that you thought you might talk about that we haven't kind of mentioned.
I don't think so. I think
I could have asked you another 10 questions, but I thought, well...
No, I mean, I think it's so interesting, and I think there's so much for us to learn. I think those of us who are home educating our young people now and really watching what's going on for them, you know, it's like it's uncharted territory. That's why I think it's so exciting as a psychologist. It's like wow, look at them the way they learn, and I think it's particularly exciting as a mother of teenagers now to be able to look back and think of how much things have changed, and how now I can see the roots of what they're doing now in their childhoods, but I couldn't at the time. You know, when looking forward, we definitely had my goodness, they're not doing anything but playing video games for years. And now I can see how much they've learnt from that and how much they're doing from it, but I couldn't at the time. And I think that's why it's important for us to talk, home educators to talk about, you know, those who are further along, to be talking about that process.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you're right that it's changed, because I feel that when mine were kind of 5, 6, it felt like people turned 11 and then disappeared. Whereas now there seems to be, I mean, where we are in Devon, a thriving community of home educated teens, but there definitely wasn't like 8 years ago. It's interesting to think. I don't know what's changed, but something's changed. Maybe it's just that people are thinking, I'm going to be braver and keep going than they were before. I don't know, but yeah,
it's possible. Or maybe secondary schools have got more pressured. I wonder whether there's, you know, there are reasons. I don't really know. It's hard to know what the real demographics are, isn't it? Because there's also people coming in and out. Because COVID has had an effect on that. COVID had a big effect.
We've been quite home ed heavy today, but it's been really interesting and I've really enjoyed it. I was going to ask a big question about how we break the mould of education as it is, but I think that's one for another day, because that's quite a big one. So instead,
we keep talking about it. I think that's the important thing.
I think you're probably right. Conversation and continued conversations is the main thing, isn't it? Everyone, and the more people that are speaking about these things, the better. I mean, we got contacted by a teacher recently who said, oh my goodness, we did a whole episode on the purpose of education, and she said I spent the whole time nodding vigorously, and she was sharing with her teacher friends and stuff. So I thought, well, it's good that we can all be part of these conversations that will hopefully drive some change at some point.
Absolutely, the ideas are spreading all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I've really, really enjoyed chatting to you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I've been asking everyone just 3 very short, quick questions to finish, just 'cause it's a nice way. So my first one is, I know you're a really busy person, but how do you relax?
How do I relax? I sing. I'm in a choir, and
cool.
I really like that, and I go running as well.
Oh, so nice.
Both of those things I found really help me.
Run by the sea.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And what are you reading or listening to right now? So that could be music or podcast or anything.
What am I reading? I tend to read stuff about work, I have to say. I'm reading lots of books about what's called by them school refusal at the moment.
Okay.
so it's not exactly a light read. And I'm also, what am I listening to? I have a kind of special interest in mind control and cults. So I'm listening to podcasts about that, actually. That's one of my ways of escaping. Yes, I listen to a podcast called A Little Bit Culty, which is they interview people who've come out of different cults. I don't know why I'm interested. Yeah. I think as a psychologist, I just find that really interesting.
Really interesting, yeah. No, that sounds great. I'll have to check that one out. A little bit culty. And I actually don't know if you're an outdoorsy person or not, but you have said you like running and you live by the sea. So I will ask why being outdoors is important to you.
Oh yeah, well, I think outdoors is just, I love living by the sea actually, and one of the reasons I love living by the sea is that it's always changing, and I think that's what I like about outdoors, that you go out there and it's like, one day that the sea is really huge and there's massive waves, another day it's totally calm, or there might be foam everywhere, and you just can't really, you don't even necessarily know before you go down there what it's going to be like. And I think there's something really just refreshing about that. This is an uncontrolled environment. This is it's changing by itself, and it kind of connects you with something larger than yourself because of that.
Yeah.
So that's why.
Lovely. It's important to me. Brilliant. Oh, well, thank you so much for your time today, Naomi.
Thank you. It's been great.
And just give us a quick plug for your book, A Different Way to Learn, that's coming out later this summer, is it?
Yes, it should be coming out in June, and it is about neurodiversity and self-directed education specifically. Oh. And I interviewed lots of families for it. So there's lots of when you're talking about that article about play-based till 9 or 10, basically I interviewed lots of families for that book, and I put their examples in there. And one of my main motivations in doing that is that I wanted parents, particularly parents who maybe are home educating their autistic children or their kids with other ADHD or other neurodivergent conditions, I wanted them to see, oh, it's not just us. Other people are doing this too. I wanted to tell the stories of families whose stories aren't often told.
Yeah. Oh, well, I look forward to reading that. Sounds great. Brilliant. Well, thanks so much again for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Bye. A big thank you again to Naomi for joining us to talk about education, motivation, the psychology of learning and all sorts. We really enjoyed that conversation and hope that you enjoyed listening just as much. This actually marks the first in a 3-part mini-series within this series on home education. So please do come back in a fortnight when we'll be talking to 2 home educating parents about why they home educate, what it looks like and how it works in reality. And then after that, we've got a really fun final little third one where we've talked to a group of home educated kids from our forest school sessions about their perspective on home education. Until then, please, as always, like the podcast, subscribe, rate, share, all those things. And until next time, thanks for listening.